Hi there, this is Anna Aspinus from Anna Aspinus Designs, and in this video tutorial I'm going to show you how you can quickly and easily create your own custom photo collage using an artsy template and digital art supplies by Anna Aspinus Designs. This particular layout on my screen we're going to recreate using a template from WaterColor template album number 2 and digital art supplies from ArtPlay palette Love Letters, and I will provide links to those products below. We're going to start by opening our template into our workspace. So I'm going to go to File, Open, and you can see that I've created a folder in which I have placed my ArtPlay palette Love Letters. I have my template, which is page number 1 of the WaterColor template album number 2, and then I have pre-selected 3 photos. So I'm going to start by clicking on the template, double click it to open or select it, and then click OK. And you can see that a template is pretty much just a blueprint design for a finished page. And the purpose of the template, it's delivered in Adobe.PSD format, and that's a layered file format in which all of these different layers are stacked upon one another in the layers panel to create the design. And we can turn those layers on and off, or at least the visibility of those layers on and off. We can recolor any of those layers. We can, of course, move those layers by selecting the layer in the layers panel and then moving any of those layers independently. And then we can also use these layers with the clipping mask function in Adobe Photoshop to clip images to each of the individual layers to create our composition. So I'm going to go ahead and just minimize it for now, just so that we can see what we're doing with this particular template. So let's add some photos to this template, and I'll show you what I mean by a easy blended page. We go to File again and then Open, and this time we're going to select the 3 photos. I'm going to select one of them, hold down the Shift button on my keyboard, and then select the last one, which will allow me to select all of those photos, and then I'm going to click Open to bring them into my workspace. And then once they've opened, we can just move them by clicking on the tab, holding down the left mouse button, dragging and releasing to drop them into a different area of our workspace. I'm going to start with this one because it happens to be the one on top. Make sure you have your Move tool selected from the Tools panel, and then again you can click on any area of the template that you want to select, and it will select the corresponding layer in the Layers panel. The other option is to manually select the layer, but it does mean you have to have a bit of knowledge about which of the layers are which, and it does require sometimes some scrolling through the layers, so I like to use the auto select feature. So in this particular case we're going to select the frame mask number 1, and then we're going to drag that image, hold down the left mouse button, release, and then you can see that the photo is beneath the frame but resides over the top of the mask. And we're going to have to resize this photo in order to be able to fit more of the image onto the mask area. That's the area within this frame. To do that, I'm going to hover my mouse or my pen over the corner of the photograph, and you can see we get this diagonally double-ended arrow. And once you have that symbol, then you're going to click down, and you can see that the bounding box changes. If you're working in the full version of Photoshop, you're going to want to hold down the Shift button on your keyboard as you drag these corner points in order to resize that image proportionately. If you're working in Photoshop Elements, you're going to want to make sure that the Constraints Proportions box is checked at the bottom of your screen when you have that Move tool selected. So just drag it inwards. I've been working in Photoshop Elements too long, so I need to hold down the Shift button and then drag that photo inwards. You can see what happened previously when I didn't hold down that Shift button, and then find the area. And I don't want to use all of this image, I just wanted to kind of capture a glimpse of some of these red houses, which are very typical in the east of England. And so once you have it exactly how you want it within that square frame, then you can press the check mark at the top of your screen. In Photoshop Elements, that will be on the edge of the bounding box, usually at the bottom, and then click OK. And then once you have the photo as you want it and it's resized, then we want to clip that photo to that underlying mask layer. And to do that, you can go to Layer, Create Clipping Mask, and you can see how that photo then quickly conforms to the shape of the underlying mask. Once we have that photo in position, we can close it out and we can repeat the process with the other two images. So the next one I want to use is this one. So we'll click on that frame layer, drag the image across, again go to Layer, Create Clipping Mask. You'll note that next to the menu item you can see the shortcut, so you could press Alt Control G on your keyboard and that will create the same effect. So this time note that I am clipping the photo first, and then I'm going to go up and hold the Shift button down on my keyboard and resize the image, and it gives you a bit better visual of how small you want to go with that particular image. And I wanted to get the white contrast of this building. I really like how in England you have these buildings that almost look like they're two completely different buildings that are put together, and usually it's because they were built at different time periods. So once you have it how you want it, again click that check mark at the top of your screen to accept that transformation, and then you can go ahead and close that image out by clicking on the cross at the top of the image. And then finally we're going to add the focal image, which happens to be these very quintessential roses against a brick wall that surrounds Lincoln Castle. So again, this time let's go and select the photo blends in the Layers panel instead of using the Auto Select feature, and then drag the image onto our page. And again, we're going to go to Layer, Create Clipping Mask, and then that's quite nice, but I wanted to get more of that brick wall in there, so I'm just going to pull that down till I get to the edge of my bounding box. There's that double-ended diagonal arrow, and then hold down the Shift button and move that photo into place. And you can see I have to do it a few times in order to get it how I want it. Once you have it, then you can click on the check mark and you have your photos in place. Next step is to add some digital artistry to our page. So let's close out our photo, and you can see that it's starting to come together, our page. It's amazing how quickly you can blend an image when you clip it to a mask. And so the first thing I'm going to do is select a background for my particular layout. And with templates, you have the choice of using an artsy background, which are found in the ArtPlay palettes. If I open up the ArtPlay palette, you can see that there is a folder called Papery, and there are a number of pre-designed papers, and then there are a number of solid papers. And I always try and use an artsy paper if I can, because it saves me a lot of work kind of down the road. If I select a solid paper, then I'm going to have to add transfers and brushwork in order to make it interesting, but these artsy papers are really quite handy. I'm going to select one of each. It's always a pretty good idea to use a couple of different papers just to see which one you like best. So I'm going to this time select one of them, and then we'll go with an artsy one and a solid one. So I'm going to hold down this time my control key because I want to be more specific about the papers that I select. I don't want to select a block of papers. So if I hold down my control key, then you can click any of these papers on and off independently. So I'm going to go ahead and select these three. Open those. They'll open into the workspace. We want to click on the background layer so that when we move the papers onto our template, then the paper will reside on top of whichever layer we have selected. So it just saves moving layers up and down the stack when we actually get them onto the layout. So this is the plain artsy background paper. Sorry, this is the solid paper, which looks pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and close that one out. And then we have another artsy paper. Here's a different artsy paper. So we have kind of this is a solid background paper, but it's got some designs on it, so it could be considered an artsy paper, I suppose. We have an artsy paper that I've just brought in. Be mindful that when you pick these designs, then you're going to want to have that photo area kind of behind the image area, and you can really see that that doesn't fit very well. So I'm going to go ahead and move that one down to the trash. If you're working in Photoshop Elements, you would be moving it up to the trash, and close that image out. And then we have this final artsy paper, which was the one that I actually ended up going with because it fit really quite well. Move that into position, and you can see that this photo area on the side fits really quite nicely behind our blended image, and close that out. And it's starting to get a little bit cluttered here, so I'm going to go and switch a couple of these layers off in our layers panel just so I can focus on what I'm doing. So I'm going to switch off some of these text boxes because the chances are I'm probably not going to use them, and I'm also going to switch off this title because I think I know I'm going to end up adding my own custom title. So it's starting to come together. We've got this really nice texture and color and imagery which kind of matches the colors that we've got going on in our composition. The only thing that really needs changing at this point is the stains need recoloring. They're really not matching what's happening in the design, and they're not helping this photo blend into the background digital art. So what I'm going to do is we're going to recolor these different stains. And so again, you can see all the stain layers. They are all labeled in the layers panel. And so we can kind of click on any of them to select them, or we can use my preferred method, and that's to actually click on each of the stains to select. So I'll select the stain in the layers panel, and then I'm going to go to Edit, Fill, and then we get this fill box. And you want to ensure that you have this preserve transparency box checked. And then we're going to click on this contents box, and we want to select color from the drop down menu, and this will open our color picker. And the color picker allows us to sample colors from the colors or the shades that are already pre-existing within our photos. So if I click on any area of my image, you can see that the corresponding color in the color picker will change to coordinate with that particular shade. So I want to go with kind of a brown color. It doesn't really matter too much because I know I'm going to have to tweak it. But once you have a rough idea of the shade that you want to go with, you can click on OK. And then, like I said, ensure that Preserve Transparency box is checked, and then click OK. And you can see that that now has changed the color of the stain. And then to go ahead and tweak that color, let's go to Image, Adjustments, and go down to Hue and Saturation. There we go. So you should get the Hue and Saturation box. And then so once you have that box, you can then tweak that color by changing either the shade, changing the saturation, and you can also lighten the color, which is exactly what I'm doing here. Just want it to be real faint. I want to see the outline of that paintwork, but I want a nice smooth transition from my photo into the background. Once you have it how you want it, you can click OK, and then we can move on to the next layer. And the next layer kind of comes around the brick, but the majority of it needs to be kind of green. This is where the green transitions into the more kind of sand cream background. So this time we're going to go to Edit, Fill, and I just want to demonstrate what happens if you don't have that Preserve Transparency box checked. So I'm going to uncheck that real fast, click on the color, then go to your color option, which will bring up the color picker, click on the green area that we want to sample in our photo, and then click OK, and then click OK, and you can see that it fills the entire area instead of filling just or changing the color of just the stain. So I'm going to go to Edit, Undo. We're going to go back to Edit, Fill, ensure that Preserve Transparency box is checked, and then click OK. And now we have a nice green layer. And again, we can go to Image, Adjustments, and this time make sure we get the hue and saturation. For Photoshop Elements users, that's under Enhance, Adjust Color. And again, we can play around with these levers to make the colors brighter or more dull, and of course lighter. And I quite like the color we've got there. It's a little bit more brown than the one that we have in our original, but that's the beauty of what we do here, is that you can never create the same thing twice. So I'm going to click OK, and then we'll go around and we'll continue coloring these stains. This one is kind of a bit of a kind of decision. Am I going to go with the green that matches with the trees, or am I going to go with the red that matches with the brick? I actually don't remember what I did in the previous one, but I think I'm going to go with the green on this particular case. So again, I'm going to sample that green, click OK, and it changes green. I'm going to go this time to Image, Adjustments, Levels, and I just want to bring up the contrast of that so that we can see that stain a bit more. It's another tool that you can use in combination with the hue and saturation tool, as you can actually lighten or darken the stain. Click OK, and then I might just want to move this down a little bit, maybe move it across just to get it right. Like the look of that. And then the only other outstanding stain that we have is this one on the side here, and I kind of want to bring some of the white that's existing on the top of the layout here, and so that carries through the sky and then into the stain here. So go to Edit, Fill, and then click on the white, or again you can go to your color and select any of these whites. Let's go with this one, slightly off-white. Click OK, OK, and then you can see that it's very subtle. If you wanted to increase the intensity of that stain, you can drag it down to the new layer icon in the Layers panel to duplicate that layer, and then you can see that it's a little bit more intense. If you're working in Photoshop Elements, your new layer icon is located at the top of the Layers panel, and you can refine that slightly by adjusting the opacity slider in your Layers panel. Make it a little less intense or not. So we have our photos in place, and we've added a really nice creative background, and I'm really liking how this is turning out. You can see that it's very similar to the previous one that I made. I like to have that in the background just to compare. So my next step here is to go ahead and just jazz up these photos a little bit. This is where you can get super creative, and you can start adding filters and adding all kinds of cool effects in Photoshop. I'm just going to go ahead and brighten them, and the way I'm going to do this is using the Levels control. So with my Move tool selected from the Tools panel and the Auto Select box checked, I'm going to click on one of the photos, and you can see that that selects the photo in the Layers panel. And then we're going to go to Image, Adjustments, Levels, and then we get presented with this kind of histogram. And so the idea is that we pull in these levers to darken and lighten areas of the image. Like that, and you can see what a difference it makes just by tweaking those levers just slightly. Usually you want to bring this highlights lever in slightly, and then I like to bring the shadows in to kind of make it really contrasty, and then adjust the medium in the center. You can see how that changes the overall tone of the image. And then if you want a little bit more pop, I kind of like my photos to be more contrasty. You can drag that layer, that photo layer, down to the new layer icon in your Layers panel and apply a soft light blending mode, and you can see how that makes that pop a little bit more. If it's too much for you, go ahead and adjust the opacity slider and take that down till you reach the desired intensity, and then you can repeat that process with your other photos So go ahead, select the image, go to Image, Adjustments, Levels, and again, we're just going to make that photo pop a little bit more. See how the colors become more intense when you do that. Click OK. That one's alright as it is. If you wanted to go ahead and add a blending mode layer, you can go ahead and do that. Makes it a little bit more contrasty. And again, image. If you're working actually in the full version of Photoshop, you also have the curves option, which is not available in Adobe Photoshop Elements. And this is a slightly different way of editing images, but you kind of want to drag that curve up and then bring the bottom half down in order to get a more contrasty image. Usually yields a very similar result, and then click OK. So you can see big difference in the images. And then once you have your images and your art in place, you can go ahead and you can add additional brushwork or elements. And so you can see on my particular layout, I decided to keep the visibility of the text boxes turned off, but I did add some cool kind of text work. And this one at the top is kind of interesting. The idea that I came up with for the page, or the thought behind this page when I put it together, was quaint. I always think that England's very quaint, and so I typed the word quaint and tried out a bunch of different fonts and couldn't quite get it to work. And then I kind of clicked on this kind of really cool font. It's called, let me see, this 18th century initials Recolor. Because I had it written in capitals, then it kind of made this really cool swirly design. So I decided to kind of keep it, and then instead of showing the entire title, I made it really quite big and just pulled it across the top, and it kind of adds a fun little accent to my page using in the form of text. And then I decided to, because I'd already added the quaint in the top, even though it's not kind of visible, I decided just to kind of put down the name and the place of the pictures that I was showing. And so I had to add the Lincoln further down my layer stack. You can see here, this is the Lanier Regular font, and I colored it to match the very deep pink that's found within these roses. So if I go ahead and just grab that, then we can bring it across and put it into position. And you can see it's actually above my image right now, which is why previously I had to bring it down the layer stack so that the portions of it kind of fit behind the shadowed photos. And then again, I added another title underneath in a different font. Sometimes when you're moving type and you have that auto select box checked, you can end up clicking on the background and moving the background. So I'm going to go ahead and unselect that auto select layer and just drag that across, just to make sure that we don't end up moving any of the underlying layers. And you can add that. You can see I've got 3 different fonts. I was kind of having a bit of fun with fonts. I've kind of rekindled my interest in them, and so I've been playing a little bit more with different types of fonts, which I haven't done for quite some time, but I have done that one in just kind of a black. So we've got white and black, which are very neutral, and then we've got a pop of color which coordinates with our flower heads, which makes that title work. And in case you're wondering, that particular font is Bambino Regular. So to complete my page, I'm just going to add a couple of dimensional elements. I've never really been a big fan of dimensional elements, but I do like to have a couple, and in fact I probably use more dimensional elements than I ever have before. There's something to do with the texture of them. They add a dimension to the page that you just can't get when you are blending flat images all the time. So I always like to add 1 or 2, and you can see I've created a cluster here using a bow and a button. So you would go up to File, Open, and then we're going to go to the Elements folder of our ArtPlay palette, and I'm going to just grab this ribbon. It's provided to you in multiple formats depending on what program you're using. I generally just grab the PNG form, which has the shadow already attached to the image. It's a one layer format with a transparent background, but it's also included in PSD format. And what that does is if you open it up and then grab the two layers, so again, hold down that shift button on your keyboard, select both the layers in the layers panel, select the move tool from the tools panel, and then move that ribbon, and you can see that I've moved it underneath the layer stack. So I need to pull it up to the top and then move into position. Again, I need to pull it up a bit further because it's not quite above all of the frames. So that's pretty good. Maybe want to bring it down a little bit. But what you can do with the PSD file is you can see that the shadow is independent from the actual ribbon itself, and so I can go ahead and I can make that shadow more or less. And then you also have the option of going to edit, fill, and you can change the color of that shadow. Sometimes it's nice to go with a warm brown as opposed to kind of a black. It's a little less harsh. So once you have that color selected, you can click OK, and you can see how that changes it slightly. Just bring it down. I usually like to have my shadows between 40 and 50 range, but it really does depend on the color of your background paper. If you have a darker background paper, obviously you're going to want that shadow to be a little darker. And again, you have the option of selecting both those layers. Hold down the shift button on your keyboard or ensure that that constrain proportions box is checked, and you can resize the elements just as we did with the images at the beginning of this tutorial. Go ahead and close that down and go back up, and then we can select another element. In this case, I went with this cute little button. There's usually a button on most of my pages. Bring that on to the layout and close it down, and then I'm going to bring that button down the layer stack and then place it just beneath the ribbon and resize it. And then I can go ahead and add a layer style to that button. Layer, layer style, drop shadow, and I like to have my angle at 120. I like to bring this down to about 40. I also like to have it in a brown. A warm brown is nice. And then we can change the distance of that shadow to make it more realistic. You don't need too much of a shadow on a button. So once you have it how you want it, click OK. And then again, you can move it around into position. This might be a good idea at this point just to pull that title down just a little bit and reorganize it. That's the great thing about these digital collages is that you can continue tweaking and moving the pieces around until you get them how you want them. And then finally, I added this stitching, which you can add in a brush format, or you can in this particular case, I actually took this stitching from another template that's included with the WaterColor template album #2, and I basically just dragged it from one template into this template. So that's another really cool idea for you too, that you can take pieces from one template and add them to another to kind of customize as you wish. So, and then I just put the stitching over the top to make it look like the stitching was attached to the bow. And then at this point, I'm pretty much done with this layout. I might add some journaling to it at a different time. It's very similar to the one that I created previously. You can go ahead. I think that this bow is slightly brighter and larger. I didn't resize this particular bow, but I did recolor it. So if I go ahead, click on that auto select box, and then I'm going to go to image adjustment levels. I'm just going to boost that a little bit, make it a little bit brighter. Kind of liked it brighter. It coordinates better with the bright pink that's found in these flowers. You can brighten it any way you want to. You also have the option of recoloring it. Go to image adjustments and hue and saturation. Again, if you're working in Adobe Photoshop Elements, you'd want to go to enhance adjust color, and then you can also tweak the hue of that ribbon if you want to. I actually quite like it the way it was, so I'm going to hit cancel. And that pretty much completes our page. If you wanted to add some journaling, of course, you could go ahead and put the visibility of that text box back on. And then I'm carefully selecting it and moving it. And then if you select the type tool from the tools panel and click within that type box, then you have the option of hovering your cursor over any of these points on the bounding box, and that allows you to resize the box to fit the space that you have available, or to fit the amount of journaling that you want to add to your layout. So you can see that works a little bit better now that I've added the title underneath the template. And that's how you create an artsy blended photo collage using your own photos and digital art by Anna Aspinus Designs. Thanks for watching, and I will see you again soon.